Hey everyone, welcome back to Smart Contract Labs. So in today's lecture, we will work on different smart contract and design it using Remix IDE. So in today's lecture, we are gonna work on rental agreement. So what is rental agreement? A rental agreement is a legal contract between a landlord and a tenant, and it outlines the terms and condition of renting a property. So when we design a smart contract, so it mainly involves two entities. First one is your owner and second one is your tenant. As you can see in this diagram, I have mentioned two entities. First one is your owner, second one is your tenant, right? And what are the tasks of the owner? So the tasks of the owner is to rent a property by setting certain parameters. And what are they? So the parameters are like deposit amount or set monthly payment, and also set the move-in date for a particular tenant, right? Similarly, we have certain tasks that should be executed or followed by the tenant. So first one is to make monthly payment. So this function should be executed by the tenant so that the tenant can make monthly payment or pay a rent for a rented property. Second, we have a terminate rental that tenant, if tenant won't, they can he or she can terminate the rental agreement, and after, but there is a condition that after the move-in date, the tenant may terminate the rental agreement. It depends on their personal choice, and it's, or maybe the contract terminates, or like that, right? Next, we have refund deposit. For example, I talked about whenever we rent a property, initially tenant has to um, deposit a certain security amount, right? So that amount should be refunded after the contract is terminated by the tenant. So these all functions gives you the basic functionality when we talk about the rental agreement. So what we do, we design a smart contract and code how and see how we can write a code for all this function, all the function that one function is for the owner and three functions for the tenant, and also specify the different conditions and different condition that we need whenever you code these functions, right? So let's understand one by one. So we will move slowly for designing this contract, because it involves so many things when we start the coding part. So again, we will work on Remix ID, or we will use Remix ID for the coding part. So here is a dashboard of Remix ID. Last, like we did, we did the decentralized voting in the last lecture. So in today's lab, we just create a new file and name it as rental agreement, right? And this is how, right? Now, like I said in the previous lecture as well, that whenever we code in Remix or in Solidity language, we have to specify two main things. The first one is your license identifier, and second one is your compiler version, right? Now you can copy all these things, or you can also do this thing to make it simple. You can copy this is from the another file or the default file that are available in the Remix IDE, and just paste it here. So what does it mean? So first is specify your license identifier, right? Let me zoom it a little bit, right? And second one is specifies a compiler version that you need to add on certain features, or to make a to check the coding part of this file, right? Now let's start. So first, what we create a contract, right? So by using the contract keyword, and then name of the contract is rental agreement, right? We always use a name that is self-understandable, right? So rental agreement contract is for rental agreement, right? Now, our first, we create contract. Second, we declare variables, right? And then third, we declare the constraint or the condition with the help of modifiers and then constructor. So remember this structure. First, we always think about the variables that we need while designing this smart contract, and then we think about the conditions. There are certain conditions we need to impose on certain functions. So what are they and how we can design them using the modifiers, right? And last one, whenever you declare a variable, they are termed as your state variables that are act as a global variable for that contract, and we need to initialize them with some initial values. For that, we need a constructor, right? So these are the basic things you need to figure out while you'll start coding of a particular smart contract, right? Now let's see this diagram. As you can see in this diagram, for owner, so we have two entities, right? So we have two entities, and so we have to specify both the entities. And for entities, we have a data type called as address, right? So because and we can make it as public, so owner, right? And second entity we have is public tenant, right? So these two things are done. Now, let's figure out other variables that we need for giving the functionality or for providing the functionality, different functionalities. So first one, so it's a rental agreement, right? So first one, like whenever owner, so just move step by step. So we talk about first the variables that we need for this function, and then the variables we need for these functions. So for rent a property, we need a deposit amount, because we are initializing we need some security amount from the tenant, right? And next, we need a monthly rent from a tenant. So for that, we need these two types of variables. And third one for this rent a property is move-in date. We also need a move-in date variable, so that we can store the move-in date of a particular tenant in some variable. So these are the three variables we need first. So let's declare them. So first one is your deposit amount, that should be UN, right? And just make it public and make it as deposit amount, right? Next, we have UN public and monthly rent. There should be this second variable for this owner function. And next one, as we discussed, deposit amount is already done, monthly rent is done, and move-in date is remaining. So public move-in date. So this should be the third variable, right? Now, whenever owner rents a property, so that property has certain status, like at the starting it is vacant, and then once it is rented by a certain tenant, it should be occupied, and then if that contract is terminated by the tenant, then it should be terminated, right? So we have to maintain a status of a particular property, right? For that, there are two options. Either you can take three variables to store the different status, like the vacant, occupied, and terminated. And or we have this option called enumerator. You can use enum for storing the different states in under a single name, right? So I'm using this enum to store our rental status, right? And what are the possibility of values? So whenever you are declaring it, you just have to use this curly braces, right? The first value is vacant. These are the possible values we can have in this variable, right? And second one is occupied, occupied, and third one is dominated. So these are the possible values that defines the status of a property, right? Now it is done. Now next one, if to access this the out of these three values, we can declare one variable of enum type of this rental status type, right? So for that, I'm just taking it as a data type now. So the data type is rental status. That is your enumerator, right? Make it public and just make it a one variable for storing the status of a property, right? Like this, right? It is done now. So now next. So these are the following variables we need, and we also need to specify the status of a property, vacant, occupied, and terminated. For that, we have used the enumerator. Done. Now next thing. So first, declaration of variables. Then second, declaration of conditions in the form of modifiers, and third, constructor, the initialization of the state variables, right? So these things you have to keep in your mind whenever you design a smart contract. You have to figure out that what are the different variables I need for different function to give to define them properly, right? So this is so let's talk about modifiers now. Now, like I specific, as you can see, the owner is responsible for executing a function called rent property to rent a property to a tenant, right? Similarly, for the tenant entity, we have three different functions: to make monthly payments, to terminate rental, or to ask for a refund deposit, right? So these functions should be executed by the tenant, and this function should be executed by the owner. So these are the two conditions that we figure out from this diagram, that only owner should be there and only tenant should be there, right? So let's do the this coding. So first modifier should be only owner, right? And you can define this modifier like this. And we always define the condition by using the required statement, right? And we have a global variable called as message.sender, who would store the address of a person who is deploying this contract, right? Whoever person who deploy this contract, that their address, his or her address, should be stored in this global variable, that is message.sender. This should be equal to the owner address. If it is equal, then it is fine. Otherwise, you have to display the error message that only the owner can call this function. Yes, right? I told you we always terminate a modifier with the underscore sign, because this is the condition that we have to specify at the starting when you are initially when you are executing the function, and the letter code and the rest of the code of the function should be replaced by the sign. So this is how we can define or declare a modifier. Now next modifier is for tenant. So only, because we have two addresses, one for owner, one for tenant. So like this, we have to use in a similar way. Just here, just need to change one thing, that is, instead of owner, we have a tenant, right? If it is true, then it's fine. Otherwise, you have to display the error message that only the tenant can call this function, like this, right? It's done. And we have to use this underscore sign at the end of the modifier, right? Now, if you think about, this is these are the two main modifiers we need while you are executing, you are declaring a variable or functions, right? Now, next one, we also need one modifier. If you think about like this, that for checking the status of a property, right? So, these functions make monthly payment only executed by the tenant if that property is occupied, right? The status of that property is occupied, right? If it is vacant, so there is no point of executing make monthly payment function, right? Similarly, if it is terminated, the contract has been terminated by the tenant, then there is no need. So it that tenant should not is not able to access or to execute make monthly payment, right? So we have to define this condition as well, that there are certain functions that should be available only when the status of the property is occupied, right? Like monthly payment or terminate rental, right? These functions should be executed when the property status is occupied. So for that, we have to declare what modifier, right? So only when occupied, like this, right? And here we have a required statement to specify a condition. So here we have a variable called rental status. So if rental status equal to rental status, this is the name of the enumerator, right? Dot occupied, right? Like this. Done. If it is equal, then it is fine. Otherwise, we have to specify error message that property is not occupied. Occupied, like this, right? Done. So this is how it works. Now we have to end this with the help of an underscore sign. Right. So far, I hope it is clear to all of you. And moving forward, so these are the we are just initializing a few things whenever you design a smart contract, like variables, modifiers. Now, we also need one thing, that is the constructor, right? I told you at the starting. So these are the basic things we required when before you'll start the coding of functions, right? So for initializing the certain variables in the starting, we need the constructor. So this is how you can declare a constructor you in Solidity programming language, right? So here we need constructor for initializing the deposit amount, monthly rent, and this should be initialized and the owner who is executing this function, right? So here you can just make it as a parameterized constructor, or you can just so that you can whenever you are making a parameterized constructor, so you have to pass certain parameters for deploying this contract, right? This thing you have to keep in your mind that whenever you are declaring a parameterized constructor, you have to call it by passing certain variables, right? So here I'm taking two variables, uint, one for deposit amount, for initializing the deposit amount, right? And another for uint for monthly rent. So I need these two variables for initializing deposit amount and monthly rent variables. So first I need to initialize the owner. The owner should be the message who is executing or deploying this contract, right? Next one, the deposit amount variable should be initialized by using this underscore variable that you will pass while you're deploying this contract, right? Next is your monthly rent. Monthly rent. This should be initialized with the parameter like this. So this is done. So initialization part is done. And one more thing, you have to make this or initialize this, because all this function is done. So move-in date should be specified when you are calling the function. Monthly rent and all these variables are done, right? Now this is remaining, that rental status should be vacant at this starting. So I have to initialize it initially, that is rental status should be rental status dot vacant, right? It is done now. Now all variables are done, I guess. Yeah, only move-in date is remaining, that will ask when we when we code the functions, right? Now next, now we have to moving forward. Now we start coding different functions, right? So first function is your rent property, right? Just do this part. So this is how you can declare a variable in Solidity. So function rent property. I'll always prefer to use camel case whenever you're declaring some variable or function. It's a good practice. So first one, for renting a property, right? You have to give the address or declare the tenant, who is the tenant. So you have to pass it as a parameter, right? The tenant address and also the move-in date. And then rest of the things, then for renting, whenever you are renting a property, so you have to change the rental status of it, and then uh, initialize certain variables, right? Let's do this, right? So first one should be the address of the tenant. So I'm just taking this as a local variable, address tenant. And second, next is your um, declare the move-in date. So I just use this move-in date, right? Like this, and then this function should be public. And this function only be executed by the owner, like we declare here. So this is the function should be owned by the owner only. Tenant is not able to execute this function. So for that, we have which modifier? The only owner modifier. So I have to specify the only owner modifier here, right? So specify here only owner, right? Like this. It's done. Now the declaration part is done. Now just to work on the definition part, and definition is going to be simple one, because you just need to initialize few variables, right? You just initialize the tenant address and then move-in date to the move-in date variable, and also just update the status of the property. So like this is how it just is going to be simple one. This is how you can just rent a property, right? So first condition we need to check. So whenever you are renting a property, you have to check that property is vacant, right? So first this check should be there. So rental status, no, this is should be rental status equal to rental status dot vacant. Should be vacant, then only the owner will be able to rent that property to a particular tenant, right? So this should be there. Otherwise, if it is true, then it is fine. Otherwise, we have to display error message that this is not a vacant property. It's already occupied by someone else. This is done, right? Next, now just initialize the variables like this, like you have two parameters. So first one is for the tenant and second one is for move-in date. So should be move-in date, right? Now next, just update the rental status. Rental status as dot occupied. Now it is occupied. After the execution of this function, that property status is occupied now, right? So this is done. This is all about this rent property function. So what we did in this function, that first we check the property status, whether that property is vacant or not. If it is vacant, then we just initialized the tenant address, move-in date, and rental status, updated the rental status as occupied, right? It is done, and this function should be executed by only owner. Right now, let's work on the next three functions that owned by these functions are owned by the tenant. First one is make monthly payment, and then terminate rental and refund deposit, right? So this is the deposit amount we are talking about, the refund part. This is act as a security, right? So this is done. Now next is the monthly, make monthly payment. Next function is make monthly payment, like this. So here, so whenever you're declaring these variables, this variable should be public first, right? Should be occupied when it is should be executed by only tenant, and one more thing, should only be executed when that property is only occupied, right? This modifier you have used. Whenever the status of the property is occupied, then only you can execute this monthly make monthly payment, right? And there's one more thing we have to use here, because whenever you are making the payments and you are transferring some value from one address to another address, so that function should be a payable. So we have to use this keyword. So whenever you are making a payment or transferring a certain value from one address to another address, we have to make that variable or the function as payable. So we have to make this variable function as payable because we are making a payment, we are passing certain values, right? And so this is done, the declaration part is done. Now let's just talk about 1 second, let me check. Only occupied identifier not found, not unique, only when occupied. Sorry, so it should be only when occupied. Is done now, right? Oh, so sometimes it happens, you declare some variable with some other name, and but so just always check there should not be a red line whenever you're doing a coding part, right? If there is a red line, to check for it, what is the conditions, and then you can resolve it at the same time, right? Now just so whenever you are making a payment, so first check, we need to do this, that by using the required statement. So there is a global variable called as message.value. It represents the amount of ether you're sending along with the transaction, right? So there is a global variable, like we have a global variable as message.sender for storing the address. So whosoever is executing the functions, right, or deploying this contract. Similarly, we have a message.value. It is stored the amount of ether you're transferring along with the transaction, right? So here we are using this value, message dot value, like this, should be greater than or equal to the monthly rent. Why we are, because this is the minimum amount you should have in your account before using this function, right? If it is this condition is true, then it's fine. Otherwise, you have to just give an error message or display an error message if insufficient balance. You don't have money, right? You have to do some hard work and earn some money. Yeah. Next, now if it is this is not you have enough money, then you have to transfer the amount to the owner. So you have to transfer the amount. So payable owner, you have to make the variable and the function as payable whenever you talk about of transferring certain amount of value from one address to another, right? Here the address is owner, right? You're transferring. So for that, for transferring some value or the ether, you have a function as transfer, right? And here you have to specify the amount you are transferring, right? So here we are transferring this much amount to the address of the owner, right? Who is the owner of the property. So this is how you just transfer the amount or make the monthly payment for the property you are renting. Right, it is done now. Make monthly payment method is done. Now, which one is the next function is terminate rental, right? Now, function is terminate rental, right? So, this function terminates the contract or agreement between the tenant and the owner, and this function should be executed by only tenant like this, right? And it should be executed only when the property is occupied like this, right? And one more thing I missed here, that is public, should be public as well. And then this is done, right? So for terminating a contract, you just check or set the rental status as terminated. That's all, right? So you have to rental status as equal to rental status dot terminate. So this is done. You're just updating the status of that property as then that contract is terminated uh, by the tenant, right? Next, so this is it's a very simple function. Now next function is which is refund deposit, refund of your. So once the contract is terminated, now you have to refund the security amount to the tenant, right? So this function is also should be executed by the tenant, right? So just like on the function as refund deposit, right? And this function should be public. Only tenant execute this function, and because again the payment will be involved in this function because there is a transfer of amount from the owner to the tenant now. So we have to make this variable function as payable as well, right? So whenever you involve the transfer of amount from one address to the another, it should be a payable. That function or variable should be payable, right? So first, we have to check whether the contract is terminated or not. Then only the security amount will be refunded to the tenant. So that for that, we need to use this required statement and just check the status of your property. So the rental status should be equal to rental status dot terminated like this. It's done. It's done, and then if it is fine, then it's good. Otherwise, you have to display setting message like rent that agreement is not terminated like this. It's done. Now, if it is done and condition is true that first the agreement is terminated by the tenant, now it's time to refund the amount, right? So the refund amount should be, so just take a local variable called as refund amount and just initialize it with the deposit amount, because this is where you have initialized at the startings, right? So this refund amount, it's equal to the deposit amount, and you just need to make the deposit amount as 0, because you are transferring all the amount of your security to or refunding it to the tenant, right? And then just use the same that we did while making the monthly payment. So here payable is tenant, because now we are transferring to tenant address, and the same function we will use here, that is your transfer function, and we will here transfer the refund amount instead of the message dot value. Yes. So this is done, I guess. Right, so all functions are done, I guess. Make monthly, refund, deposit, all functions are done. And I guess this is, the code is looking pretty good. There is no error here. So let's just summarize you a few things. So we have two entities in this contract. First one is your owner and tenant. Then we have certain variables that we declared at the starting, and we took the enumerator for setting the different status of a property, that is vacant, occupied, and terminated, right? Then we have three modifiers. First, for checking whether that function should be executed by the owner, and second one should be executed by the tenant, and third one, it should be executed when the property is occupied by some person, right? Next, now it's time to initialize certain variables at the starting. So we have initialized the owner, then we have initialized deposit amount, monthly rent, and just set the property status as vacant. That should be the starting status, right? Now we have the four function. The first function is to make a payment, rent a property. For renting a property, we have to set certain parameters. So first, we have to check whether that property is vacant or not. If it is vacant, then we just updated the tenant variable, move-in date, and updated the property status as occupied. That is very important. And this function should be executed by the owner, right? Next, we have a make monthly payment. As the name suggests, the payment should be monthly rent should be should be done by the only tenant, and it should be done only when property is occupied. And this function is payable. This is a new term here, payable. So whenever there is a transfer of amount involved while you are doing the transaction, so you have to make this function as payable, right? So here we just check whether the tenant has a sufficient amount of balance or not. If there is a sufficient amount of balance, then we have just used the transfer function to transfer this message dot value to the owner, right? Next, we have a terminate rental. It's a very simple function in which just you have updated the rental status as terminated, and last one is a refund deposit. It's again a payable function because you have to transfer the deposit from a deposit amount to the tenant address by using the transfer function. So all done. So first we use this solidary compiler and compile this. So it's compiled. As you can see, there is a green check here. Now you have to deploy it, right? So for the deployment, make sure which account you're using as an owner. So this is your owner account. So whenever you are deploying it, it is asking for two parameters, right? So here you can see there's an error sign here because in the constructor you used a parameterized constructor one, and you have to pass the two parameter. So first one is your deposit amount. So for example, the deposit amount is 5, right? And monthly rent is your 10, right? Just take a simple example and now deploy it. Now the transaction is successful. As you can see, the green tick here, right? And this is the, 1 second, let me finish this off and do it again. Now you currently have no contract, right? You just deploy it. Now it is deployed. Just click on it. You just click on that trend and you can find all the public variables that you have used. Now you can check who is the owner. So the owner is having this address. As you can see, this is the address you have used for deploying this contract, right? Now you can also check monthly rent. So monthly rent is 10 because this is the second parameter you have passed. So here the monthly rent is set as 10. And you can also check the deposit amount. So deposit amount is 5 here, right? Now, next, just add or rent a property. So for renting a property, you have to pass the two parameter. First, the address of the tenant. Second, the move-in date, right? So you can take the next address as your tenant. So I'm just copying this address, right? And pasting it here like this, and move-in date, I'm passing it as 21, right? And then execute this function. As you can see, we have an error message here because I have executed this function using the address of tenant, which is not allowed. You have to be the owner for executing this rent property because we have used a modifier only owner here, right? Now execute this function. Now it is successful. right? Because owner can execute this function, right? Next, now we have rented this property. Just check the status of this. It is 1. So enumerator stores the value as 0, 1, 2. So it always is the index of the all the values of the enumerator starts from 0. So 1 means occupied. So as you can see, the rental status is 1. That means it is occupied now. Now next is task that make monthly payment. Now for making a monthly payment, we are at the address of the owner, that is your first one. So we have to change it for executing this make monthly function, because as you can see here, make monthly payment should be executed by only tenant, right? So I'm just changing the address here, and so only tenant, so it should have a sufficient value. So you have to specify certain value here. See so this should be greater than or equal to 10. Otherwise, this function will not execute, because the monthly rent is 10. So you have to have certain value. Otherwise, it will give this error insufficient balance, right? Now I have changed the address of the tenant here. I have specified certain value, because tenant account certain value tenant has to have a certain amount of value for making a payment. Now just execute. Now it is done. Make monthly, it is done. It is successful, right? This is done. And now the tenants wants to terminate a contract. So just execute this terminate contract. Now that property is terminated. Now just check the rental status now. So it is 2 now. As you can see, the 2 amount is terminated, right? Now we have to make a refund. So refund. So this should be the tenant one, right? And it is showing some error that refund deposit is only and should be payment. And it is showing some error. Let's check what is the problem here. Transaction has been reverted to the initial state. The call should be function. If you send value, the value you sent should be less than your current balance. That means whenever you are executing this function, you have to have a certain value. This is the requirement here. So now it is executed, right? Now it is executed and the amount is transferred to the tenant account. As you can see, also check the move-in date here. So this is how it works, right? So that's all from my side. I hope you all enjoyed this lecture. And if you have any suggestions, any comments, you can tell me by using below box, right? Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye bye.